Pull out your hose and grab your can. We're about to integrate another Pest Geek podcast. Hi, everybody. Frank Hernandez here, and welcome to the Pest Geek podcast, bringing you the latest information on pests, products, and politics from today's leading industry sources to help you start, manage, and grow your pest control business.
Hey, welcome back. Welcome back to another edition of the Pest Geek podcast. I am Frank Hernandez, your Pest Geek, here discussing all things pest. We want to remind our audience to join in on the revolution. That's right, join in on the conversation, be part of the society. Pest Geek Podcast Listeners Group on Facebook. And we're on YouTube. We're on the web, pestgeekpodcast.com. Check out there the notes, everything that we put into the podcast. They're all on there. And here is Stephen Van Tassel with today's topic.
Thanks, Frank. Stephen Van Tassel here, wildlife control consultant, living the wildlife. Wanted to bring you another episode of our podcast here and wanted to talk about 13-line ground squirrels. That was one of the requests posted on Facebook. Thanks to all who are responding. So I'll be trying to get to some of those topics that you requested. But 13-line ground squirrels was one of the topics that was raised. So today I wanted to talk about 13-line ground squirrels because it is summertime. We're getting close to it, at least until the 21st. I'm recording today on June 8th. So let's talk about 13-line ground squirrels. I think they're really cute. Very interesting little ground squirrel. Let's begin with their scientific name, and that is Ictidomys tridecemlineatus. And so they used to be called Spermophilus tridecemlineatus. The tridecemlineatus means 13-lined, so that's pretty understandable. Spermophilus, which was their older name, older genus name, means seed lover. But I don't know what Ictidomys means. But that's their new name. Their new name is Ictidomys tridecemlineatus. So a lot of the genus guys that are out in biology who are working on various scientific names of animals, they've been doing a lot of tweaking. It's the DNA work. With all the phylums and genuses and species, it's been a mess. Those of you in the bug control world, it's even worse. So they've been tweaking around with various groups, and so you thought you knew the scientific name in the past, and then they keep tweaking it around. So it's quite annoying. I hope they settle this out soon so that we can start memorizing things without having to re-memorize new names. But why do I talk about the scientific name of an animal? Well, if you're trying to do some quality research on a particular species, you want to be sure that what you think the animal is what someone else thinks the animal is. So by using the scientific name, you know you're all talking about the same species. And so when you're looking up things online, you don't want, I love 13-line ground squirrel websites, as fun as they may be. You want to have a website that has quality, hard scientific information. As we all know, that just like some people are better storytellers or historians than others, so not all information on the internet is the same. And so by using the scientific name, you're often able to get to higher quality information, peer-reviewed information that can be gained. So understand those two words, Ictidomys, that's Ictidomys, tridecemlineatus, which is tridecemlineatus. So the older name, of course, was Spermophilus. The older genus was Spermophilus, but that's been dropped in favor of Ictidomys. So enough said about that. It is a ground squirrel. That is we generally distinguish different types of squirrels. Ground squirrels are those that don't climb trees, as a rule of thumb, although we know that woodchucks certainly climb trees. versus tree squirrels, which of course are much more arboreal, much more time spent in trees than on the ground. So this ground squirrel is quite small. It's only 7 to 12.5 inches long in terms of its total length. Now you'll recall that total length always includes the tail. So if you're reading literature and it says total length, then you know that that includes the tail length. So tip of the nose to the tip of the tail, not the fur of the tail, has to be the bone of the tail, is the total length. And if you're dealing with body length, then obviously you're not including the tail. That would be to the base, measurements to the base of the tail. But researchers often talk about total length as opposed to body length. So be sure you distinguish those two concepts. So 7 inches long to 12.5 inches kind of gives you an interesting range there. The span of my hand from the thumb to the index finger, tip of my index finger, when I spread my hand out as far as about 8 inches. So that's a good tip for you out in the field, is you should have that understanding of how much, what's that measure? You should measure it out. How wide is that? That's called a span in terms of the ancient world. And so obviously, by these measurements, a 13-line ground squirrel, some of them will be smaller than my span, but most, of course, will be longer than my span. So they're called 13-line ground squirrels because, well, they have 13 lines. In fact, they have alternating colors. It goes dark to light to dark to light, and some of them are spotted lines. And so they're, once you picture one, and I would encourage you to go online and get a picture of one, they're pretty easy to tell. They're and they are terribly cute. Where do they live? Well, they're a grassland creature. Now, the prairie has two different types of grasses. I'm obviously being very simplistic here. You have what's called tall grass prairie and short grass prairie. 13-liners tend to work towards, they like short grass. So they tend to be in the Great Plains, but their range goes as far east as Ohio, far west as Montana, far north is Alberta, and as far south as Texas. So areas where there is grassland primarily, and they like well-drained soils. So because they are a burrowing animal, if you think about it, animals that burrow can't live in a swamp, right? You can't, and if you're burrowing in the ground, you can't live in the swamp. That's just not, because your den would flood, right? So that's not going to work very well. So if you have a high water table, it's just not going to happen. They need well-drained soils, and that's where they like to live. So they don't like living in tall grass because they can't see the predators coming. So areas, as we continue to mow grassland, have golf courses, have cemeteries, places where we have manicured turf, 13-line ground squirrels can survive within that particular range, as I told you, between Ohio and Montana and Alberta to Texas. So obviously it's a pretty wide range. So a lot of our listening areas should be able to have 13-line ground squirrels in their repertoire. What do they eat? Well, they eat seeds. Of course, as I said, their older genus name was Spermophilus, seed lovers, so that makes sense. They love seeds. But they like a little bit of meat too, and they are not afraid to dabble in the meat side of the world. And so that's something that's important when we talk about an animal being vegetarian. We have to be careful that we don't understand that as being a pure vegan, right? They're vegetarians most of the time. It's like when you talk to some vegetarians, they're all vegetarian for a little while, then you put some bacon in front of them and they're gobbling it down like they've been starving, right? So they're not pure vegetarians. And so 13-line ground squirrels do like to take some protein, and that is often picked up through insects. They are significant predators of insects, particularly grasshoppers and the larvae of butterflies. And they will also eat eggs, the eggs of birds, and small mammals. But believe it or not, the research actually shows that people have witnessed 13-line ground squirrels eating and killing, not just eating them, killing them, house sparrows, the young of cottontails, small chickens, snakes as well. So they will kill other animals that they can get a hold of, that they can grasp. So there's been some witnesses of them eating some other things. And so that's caused some people to be concerned, that they're going to go after pheasant eggs and that sort of thing. Certainly possible, but they are probably not a significant cause of morbidity or mortality among pheasants and some of those ground nesting birds, although they will predate on those. How much of an impact do they really have? Well, some researchers found that when it comes to farmers, 13-line ground squirrels can significantly impact crops, because when the farmer goes out and, let's say, puts out seeds for corn, what the ground squirrel will do is he will actually follow the seeds and dig them up out of the ground, particularly as the seed is maturing and it begins to send up a shoot. The ground squirrel just simply goes through the row and picks them all up and then eats that kernel that's remaining. And the devastation can be quite significant for the areas where you have 13-line ground squirrels. They will pick it up, and then once that seed has been consumed by the growing vegetation, by the growing corn plant, then obviously the predation, that damage stops. So when you look at different cornfields, if you're in a cornfield growing area and you have 13-line ground squirrels and you see areas where there are bare spots, understand that bare spot could be the result of flooding, or it could be the result of that 13-line ground squirrel plucking up those kernels before the vegetation of the corn plant consumed that kernel. Because once that's consumed, there's no purpose for the ground squirrel to be pulling it up. But they can take out several rows, to be sure. However, you would say, well, that's a reason why farmers will want to kill them. True, that is certainly true. But the research shows that as the summer goes on, ground squirrels make up for the damage that they cause the farmer by the level of insect control that they perform. Because once the females start having young, their protein needs go up dramatically because they have to create milk to nurse their young. So this is when the ground squirrels are transitioning over to a more protein-based diet. And so they'll still eat seeds, don't get me wrong, but they begin to need a little bit more protein, and they will start feeding on the insects. And what the researchers found was that, yes, ground squirrels do lower crop production by their seed eating in the early part of the year, in the growth period of that harvest. But as the season bears on, they actually compensate the farmer for his earlier losses by the level of insect control that they're creating. Because remember, insects are going to have a negative impact on production as well. And the ground squirrels actually balanced out. So the researchers thought that as a cost for farmers, they were a net neutral. So yeah, they did a little bit of damage in the earlier part of the year, but as the summer wore on, the benefits of having ground squirrels nearby and their insect eating ability actually compensated for the earlier losses. So it was a wash. It didn't really matter. So if a farmer wants to kill ground squirrels because they're harming the crops, sure, but understand that there's probably going to be more significant losses to their crops by other organisms than 13-line ground squirrels. But for most of you in our listening audience are going to realize that people don't like 13-line ground squirrels because they're creating these sort of silver dollar sized holes in their turf. And that can be damaging. And so I call them lawn Nazis. I know it's kind of a pejorative term that I use, but some people are just a little too enamored with their grass. I mean, now I understand why golf courses need to be concerned about their grass, but for some people, they really need to relax a little bit. But for those that are really wired up about it, the presence of 13-line ground squirrels can really cause them some concern. Now, to be fair, 13-line ground squirrels and their burrowing can cause the collapse if you're in cemetery areas, their burrowing can create some gaps in the soil and cause some of those headstones, for instance, to begin to sink and go off kilter. And that can certainly be a problem, so they would be controlled. But generally, they're going to be in areas where the grass is mowed very well. It's because ground squirrels want to be able to see predators coming for them. How many ground squirrels can you have per acre? Well, that can be anywhere from 1 to 2.5 per acre. After the birth pulse, which tends to be, depending on your latitude, like, for example, in the Colorado area, that could be in June when the young emerge. You can have a density of up to 10 ground squirrels an acre after that, what's called the birth pulse, when the young come out of their burrow. The young do quickly begin to disperse within a week or so after emergence because they begin to start doing some fighting, and then the family unit begins to break up and the young begin to disperse to find their own territories. So the density can be kind of high, but not as high as some other organisms, to be sure. What about the burrow? Well, one study that was done, the researcher found 65 burrows of ground squirrel burrows, 13-line ground squirrel burrows, and attached to those 65 burrows was 100 entrances. So there were 65 burrows with 100 entrances. So understand that when you're seeing holes out in the landscape, there's going to be more holes than there are burrows. And when they were investigating these burrows, they found that 78% of them, so 78 out of 100 of those entrances, or 78% of those 65 burrows, were only short, or what we call shallow burrows that were used by ground squirrels as a means to find a place of shelter as they run away. Remember, when you're that small, everything eats you, right? So you need to have locations around your territory that you can run to hide, because you may not make it back to your den. You know, if a cat shows up, a hawk shows up, a coyote shows up, you need to find a place where you can get out into cover quicker before you get eaten. And so ground squirrels will create these hideaways in the landscape, but it's not necessarily their burrow. So if 78% of these burrows are shallow burrows, they're just used as escape routes, 22% actually led to a den, and the den would have been dug to a level below the frost line for that particular area. So I hope that gives you a little bit of insight. So this means when you're trapping, you need to remember, you need to have enough traps. And if you're using like a one-way door type trap where you can actually put the trap right over, like the Barron's, I think it's called the Barron's trap, if memory serves, where it actually inserts directly over the hole and puts a one-way door over the hole that allows the ground squirrel to come up out of the burrow and then through the one-way door into the trap. You need to be sure that hole is actually active and actually being occupied. So what he would do is he would go around the area, and when he saw a ground squirrel run into the hole, he would just simply cover it with the trap and come back an hour later, and he'd usually have something inside of it. So that's what he would do. Very fast, very efficient, and then he would kill the ground squirrel from there or release it depending on what his state law was. How active are ground squirrels? If you're trying to go out and find out if this area has ground squirrels now and you want to see them, when are they active? Well, research shows that ground squirrels tend to avoid being outside their burrow when the temperature is below 50 degrees Fahrenheit. They also tend to remain in their burrows when the wind is above 15 miles an hour. So if you're trying to find a time to go out and find out if there's ground squirrels available, say you wanted to shoot them, for instance, well, if it's below 50, not a good time. And if the wind is above 15 miles an hour, again, not a very good time. And I would also suggest if it's raining, you probably want to avoid that as well. So you want to be looking for those bright, sunny days low wind, that is when the ground squirrels are often going to be most active during that particular time. And they are going to have to be active. They have to put on a lot of weight for the hibernation period, because that hibernation period begins quite soon for them. So let's talk about their hibernation time. So they can emerge from hibernation in Colorado. We'll use Colorado as the illustration here. Anytime between April 1st and April 15th. So again, latitude matters. And it was how high, how close to the North Pole are you versus how far away are you matters, as well as your elevation. So again, we're dealing with grass prairie here, grasslands, so they're not going to be up on mountaintops, so at 10,000 feet or something, so that's not going to happen. You want to think about where would you have found buffalo in the past. That's probably where you would have found these 13-line ground squirrels, where they could have lived, okay? Males enter hibernation sometime around July. Females enter hibernation between July and August. And the young tend to go into hibernation around early September. So notice the difference in time here. So people say, well, I've seen ground squirrels around, 13-line ground squirrels around in October. Things change. Things are different. That's why when I talked about developing your own calendar, you start perceiving when things are occurring in your neck of the woods. But remember, seasonality, your location can change things, and of course the animals behave. So when we talk about research is often a snapshot in time, and it's not the word of God. It's not going to be eternal. Animals adapt and animals change, but we're giving you rules of thumb so you start learning what are the parameters. So wildlife work within a range of parameters. But the takeaway that you want to have here is if a client's calling you in August about 13-line ground squirrels, chances are you're going to be trapping most of the females and the young, not the males. So you want to make sure that your client understands how much control you're actually going to have at that particular time. Now, controlling the females is important, to be sure. But if they call you up and say, hey, I thought I called you to control ground squirrels last year, and now this next spring I'm seeing ground squirrels around, well, you need to make sure you let them know that, that you couldn't trap them all, because some of them were already in hibernation by that time. So this is something where you want to be sure you're understanding when is this person calling, how many ground squirrels are going away, are going into hibernation, how much are you really able to control at that particular time. Hey, one thing I neglected to mention, that is how many young does a female have? Because mating occurs very quickly after animals emerge from hibernation. Typically the male will come up first, females will come up next, usually within a week or so, and then mating occurs very rapidly. So how many young do they have? Well, for the older females, the females that have been maybe a year old, they're going to have 6 to 8 young. The younger females are going to have about 5 young. So the more mature females have significantly larger litters than the younger females. So you can see, if you're looking at controlling of the species, you've got to control a fair amount. If you're only controlling half the population, don't be shocked if you're getting the same number the following year if they survive hibernation. Most of the young will die before they go into hibernation, because they will suffer mortality because they're not as wily, they're not as strong, they're going to get picked off by various predators. But if they survive the winter, you can kill 50% and still get the same amount the following year because of their reproductive rate. That's my point. So people often don't appreciate how many rodents you need to kill to have quote unquote long-term control. And if you're not thinking about getting up into the 90 percentile of control, then you're kind of at a place where you're harvesting. So keep that in the back of your mind. Are there toxicants available for 13-line ground squirrels? To the best of my knowledge, there are no toxins. There are fumigants. There are fumigants available for ground squirrels, but most of your work is going to be done with trapping, shooting, and some people have used something like a gallon jug, poured the gallon jug down the hole, and then they come up into the jug as they're trying to get away from the water. But we'll talk more about control methods in a future podcast, but I hope that gives you a little bit of an idea about 13-line ground squirrels. And before I go, I wanted to talk a little bit about where I got my information, so that I don't not being accused of plagiarism here. I wanted to let you know where I got this. It's from the Mammalogy series, and the Mammalogy series is published by the Mammalogy Society, which of course is researchers dedicated to the study of mammalogy. Nothing too complicated there. And so they have published various documents on all the mammals as they work their way through. And so some of them are getting a bit old at this time, but they are still valuable, because what they are is they're essentially review articles that try to summarize all of the research done up to that point. So this article was done by Donald P. Struble, Streubel, and James P. Fitzgerald. And again, Mammalogy species number 103, Spermophilus tridecemlineatus. It's only one T on that. My mistake. One T, not two. Published in September 21st, 1978, and it's 5 pages long. And it's published by the American Society of Mammalogy. So it's a bit old. One of the rules of thumb about researchers is they like to have things within 5 years. And so I've added a little bit of information from some other work that I've done, other reading that I've done. But as a general rule, material that I provided for you today came from this journal article. It kind of gives you a screenshot, a little synopsis of information about this particular species that can help you be a more well-rounded, more informed, because your clients are going to ask these questions. Is it going to necessarily put money in your pocket? No. We'll talk about control methods another time. But what it does do is it gives you a level of expertise. We should all strive to know the biology and behavior of the animals that we're working with, whether it's a bug, whether it's an animal, whether it's a vertebrate. You want to know what you're dealing with, because it's part of being a professional. So the more you know, sometimes we think we don't need to know certain information, then lo and behold, later on we do. And that's the kind of thing that we're giving you here, to help people understand how many young they're going to have, what their behavior is. So if you're getting a call in February that people are having 13-line ground squirrels, probably not. Don't say never, but probably not, because they're going to be hibernating at that time unless the weather has gone completely kablooey. All right, enough of that. I'm Stephen Van Tassel, Wildlife Control Consultant. Hey, if you have ideas for future podcasts, definitely drop me a line, wildlifecontrolconsultant@gmail.com. I'll be happy to try to put that onto the list and deal with it in a future podcast. Thanks for your time. Back to you, Frank.
We hope you have enjoyed this edition of the Pest Geek Podcast. Until next time, have a pestacular day.
Thank you for listening to the Pest Geek Podcast. If you have enjoyed the Pest Geek Podcast, please give us a rating, write a review, or subscribe to the channel. You can join the Pest Geek Society by visiting pestgeekpodcast.com. Thank you for listening. See you next time.